I want God to trust me. Oh, I had to let that just course through my body. It felt like a little shiver. Um, but it's true. I want God to trust me. My ego wanted me to wait and record and upload this video after I completed the journey that I'm going to tell you about. After I felt like successful in doing it. And then I had to really sit with, what does success mean to me? And for me, success is living a life of obedience, doing what God has called me to do, being who God has called me to be, executing the visions that I have been given, the assignments that I have been given, and in the end, dying on empty. I want to die empty. That's success for me. And so I knew that I couldn't wait until I'd made it to the mountaintop, because someone needs my valley. So here it is. I'm preparing to go on a trip. I'm going to deliver a couple of workshops for a consulting project, and it's the first trip that I've taken by myself in 4 years since having my son. And yes, part of that time I could say, well, it was because of the pandemic, and yes, obviously it was. We were shut down. But even after that, when things started to lift, the fear would just keep coming up, and it would cripple me to a point that I wouldn't go. And not fear of COVID, but my fears from the experiences surrounding my postpartum depression and my grief journey that created an experience of suicidal ideation that I have never talked publicly about until now. And because suicide is triggering and postpartum depression is triggering, I want to be sensitive to how I craft this story. And so what I will do is tell it the best way that I can within those parameters. When my son was born, it was the day that I realized that my mother wasn't coming back, that she had transitioned, and it had been 2 years since she had transitioned at that point. And I knew, logically, I knew that she was gone. Emotionally, when she didn't show up at the hospital, I reverted back. And I struggled really badly, and then the postpartum depression hit, and I was just in a very dark space. And there was a day that I felt like I was outside of my body completely. There were a lot of days where I felt like that, but this day particularly just was really, really hard. And my son was a little over 9 months old, and we had just moved, and I had just earned tenure at my previous job and had resigned because we moved, and I was struggling with, like, who am I outside of my life as a university professor, and is my life only as his mother now and as my husband's wife, and like, who am I? What am I here to do? This particular day was extremely, extremely dark, and I remember not being in control, not feeling in control of my actions. And so it felt like my body was moving and doing things that I couldn't stop. And when I left out the door to go on the balcony, I looked back. I had just nursed my son for a really long time. We had a really large pack and play at the time, and I had put him in there and put all of his toys and wrote him a letter, like the whole thing. And I remember how he looked at me. And I never wanted the weight of what I was living through to burden him. But thankfully, a text message came through from my husband that that told me he knew I was struggling, and he could feel that there were things that were going on with me and all of that. And so I didn't do it. And I remember feeling like I had to keep this a secret, because I didn't hear other Black women talk about struggling like this in motherhood. I didn't hear the stories of the pressures being too much and feeling like you're outside of your body and not knowing what to do or who could help. And so I internalized a lot. And so when I think about this trip that I'm going to take, it's feeling the feelings of his eyes, those 9-month-old eyes are starting to re-presence themselves. And I'm feeling anxious, I'm feeling nervous, I'm feeling a lot of things. And I'm realizing that everything that I'm feeling, I know I'm not alone in. And even in sharing this, even though I'm essentially talking to myself, I can feel the presence of so many of you watching, lifting me in this moment. And I appreciate you seeing me and holding space with me and being here in this moment. And what I've learned to do is I've learned to use all of these experiences that God has allowed me to live through to create that which I desired when I was at my lowest points. And that is community, particularly community with other Black women. And one thing that I do now is I ask myself 3 questions. What do I need? Who can support me? Why haven't I asked? What do I need? Who can support me? Why haven't I asked? Those 3 questions may not always, the third one may not always be relevant in, depending on the experience, because sometimes I will ask. And so as I'm going through this, now that I've learned to build community and I can reach out and share what I'm going through and vent and say, hey, I'm feeling this again, and I'm having difficulty, and I can get the support that I need. And I want to be that and do that and engage with that, create the community for that, create the healing space for that, create the safe space for that with you. And I've designed a Radical Awakening, a 10-week course that I call Radical Awakening, for Black women on grief, joy, shame, and healing. And you do not have to be grieving the loss of a parent. You do not have to be going through postpartum depression. Your grief could be the same as mine or different. It could be the loss of a relationship, a pet. You could be grieving tangible and intangible things, the loss of time. Sometimes it's just really challenging. There was a lot of shame for me surrounding postpartum depression, like I said, because I didn't hear other Black women talk about going through it. So I thought something's wrong with me. And in the midst of all of that, through the years, in these 4 years, there's been so much joy, right? I'm feeling both right now, right? The joy of doing work that I love, the joy of having time alone because I know I need that. And then also the grief of and the weight of all of my previous experiences being present again too. We're all going through things, we're all living through things, and we all need each other. And that's what this course is. That's what this Radical Awakening is. That's what this time is. It's a heavy, heavy time. We're living through so much, especially as Black women. And we need each other. We need each other. And I'd love for you to join me. I'd love to be in the valley with you. I'd love to be on the mountaintop with you. I'd love to be with you when you're just confused about where you are. And I know that there are other women who will be there with you too, who want to be. Our stories heal. Our stories matter. Our stories are timely. Our stories are generational. They're intergenerational. Our stories are now. So there's a link in the description box for you to join me on this journey called Packing Light, Getting Free, Black Women Breaking Down, Breaking Ground, and Breaking Through. Let's get free together. I love you dearly.